Welcome to the podcast today. I'm here with my good friend Andy Wibbels, a 22-year-old veteran of marketing and product development and published author. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Andy, and tell us a little about your exploits.
Yeah, my name is Andy Wibbels. I currently live in San Francisco, but I'm from Indiana. I had a book back in 2006 called Blog Wild, a guide for small business blogging. I was one of the first bloggers to get a book deal from a blog, so that was cool. And that book kind of got me my job out here to San Francisco, and I've been working in startups for the past 11 years. And right now, I am director of marketing at a search technology company called LucidWorks.
LucidWorks, right? So going back a little bit, how I met you.
Yeah.
One of our first customers at Pagely was Get Satisfaction,
Right.
and you were my contact there. You essentially were my customer, and we built up this great relationship. And I just love telling this funny story. We were just this small little company, and we were trying to compete and look bigger than we were. And I wanted a San Francisco address.
That's right.
So I think we had like an informal deal where, hey man, just rent me like 1 square foot of your office and let me use your address on the website.
That's right.
Yeah, good size back then. So, tell us a little bit about what you do every day, what your passions are in work. What gets you ticking? What gets that mind going?
Yeah, I mean, my background is, I just started watching The Dark Crystal on Netflix. It's really good. I can't believe, I'm so glad Ryan Froud, the designer, is still alive to make all this new art. So it's fun to go into that world again. Anyway, I was big into puppets as a kid in kindergarten and 3rd and 4th grade. And that turned into doing theater, obviously in high school, and doing directing and writing work. So that's why I studied in school. And then if I looked at my trajectory sort of overall, it's about storytelling and writing, and how do you frame a product, a service, a company, an idea, a case study in terms of a story that can be passed along. If I'm going to be a little hippie-ish about it, I think that the human brain is optimized to kind of retain knowledge in a story format, whether it's, the arc or it's sort of, something episodic. I think that we tell stories in the formats that we do because we cognitively retain information that way. I think civilizations pass information on in that way. So when I look at kind of all the stuff that I do, it's really about how can I create content that's compelling, whether it's really technical, which our product is a search platform for making we will run the search for your favorite home improvement online store all the way to the largest SharePoint deployment in the world, run by one of the top oil companies in the world. So,
oh, goodness.
It could be that technical, or it could be something much simpler. It could be something based with AI and ML that we haven't even thought of yet. So part of it for me is how do I translate complex technology into concepts people can understand that and educate and understand and understand the implications of the technology.
So you're essentially describing kind of the oral tradition, right? Before the written word, there was a certain kind of format that things were passed down, this kind of oral tradition that you can go back and now read in like the old texts of the Iliad and such. And so you find that that's a compelling way to speak in today's generation, the same kind of format?
When I'm doing a case study for a customer, it is literally the heroic journey. You have your before state when, things were shitty and things were bad, and it got so bad that this thing happened, this inciting moment where you decided that you had to change your life, which is, in a myth, it's when the hero leaves the city. And then they find something new, which for me is the product. And it's obviously, I'm a marketer, so my product is always the Grail. My product is always manna from heaven. My product is always, Excalibur. So the customer finds the Grail, and they bring it back to the company, and they have, fruition and benefits. So for me, it's that before state, the discovery, the build up to the discovery, and then, the using the product or service, and then how does that change their lives? And then, at the end of every myth, it's always about they come back to the town with their new knowledge, whether it's a Skywalker or, a Dark Crystal character. And how do they use that knowledge to educate people around them? Which for me is, in the terms of a marketing story, is they become fans or advocates or, brand ambassadors. So I think about that in my head when I'm trying to understand, what makes a product or service urgent. I think that we like to think that we're all rational when we make decisions about business decisions. I really think that a lot of it is emotional, but we find the facts to back up the decisions we want to make.
Yeah. Wow. So selling or buying decisions,
Yeah.
we think sometimes they're analytical, but they are very much emotionally driven. And so
Because somebody's ass is on the line. Somebody's job is on the line. So like
yes.
we have our annual conference next week, and I'm doing customer interviews in a TV studio. And part of my question is like, when did it become so bad that with what you had before, when did it get so bad that you knew you needed something different? Whether it's, the platform went down for the 14th time, or it blew up on Black Friday, or my boss dragged me in front of the board and yelled at me. There's always this kind of switch moment of, holy shit, we cannot take this shit anymore. And how can we have to do something about it. And that kind of is that inciting moment that in a story gets the story going. But in marketing, it's what was that point of you couldn't tolerate your life anymore,
Yeah, the pain got so bad that regardless of lock-in or the penalty of switching, it was time to make a change. And that sounds like something you're hitting on reoccurring, is that kind of the hero's journey. The pain was so bad, they had to change. And then, what does it look like out there when you're doing your narrative, the pain's bad, now what?
Yeah. So how did you find, you go you go out into the wilderness, which I guess we would call the RFP process, and you find the different solutions that could be what you want, or the different products, the different, diets you want to try, or skincare creams you want to try, or detergents. And you find the one that's going to work for you, and then you test it out. And, again, as a marketer, I will try and sell my product for anything. That's my job. If you say, how does Lucid Works, give you clearer skin? I will find a way, switch the product, and talk about it in a way that it will give you clearer skin, lose 10 pounds, and, a better love life in 10 days. That's the job. The answer as a marketer is always the product. So how do you shift and still be honest about what the product can do, but adapt to the conversation that's being had at the time?
Right. So it's almost one-on-one. Like each conversation needs to be tailored and unique.
Right. And that's part of, PR messaging, where, we have a launch next week for some new stuff. And we have a whole marketing messaging document about how we're going to talk about it, whether it's to analysts or the press or developers or the open source community or business stakeholders or C-level executives. And all of those audiences have different needs for technical detail versus conceptual detail. So how do you have, we are a very technical product. Most of the stuff I worked with here has been pretty technical across all my companies. So how do you have the technical credibility and build that up to what the C-level person needs to know? It's like, you're going to put AI and ML into your applications on your internal enterprise search. You're going to put in clustering classification or algorithms like word2vec or random forest, which I write a little bit about. Don't really know what it means, but it's just a word that I know. And how do you then explain to an executive what that means, why it's important? So it's knowing how to take the story through different prisms and different points of view and adapt it to who you're talking to.
It sounds like it's got to be quite malleable. When it comes to product positioning and describing the journey and the buying process, what do you think are like the key things that maybe some other people are missing?
Yeah, for me, when I used to sort of teach this stuff to small businesses, my whole thing was, why we buy is for three main reasons. It was sort of like time, money, and sex. That we buy things or we acquire things to save time, have more time, make better use of our time. So it's about leisure, it's about efficiency. And then we have the money side, which is, how to save money, have more money, have a sense of luxury or that sense of security that having, money does for you. So in terms of a business to business product, it's how do you save money, and whether it's in resources or efficiency in the software or whatever you're working with. And the third part is a little bit of a stretch, is sort of, how does this product make you sexier or better or more attractive? And for me, in a business context, that's how does this product make you appear more attractive as a user, as a stakeholder? Because your job is to bring this software in or bring this product in or do this thing. How is this going to make you more attractive as a professional? Which is a bit of a stretch if I'm going to put sex over here, because it's not a true analog, but that's how I think about it, is how do you get more visibility from the products and what you're doing in the workplace. So that's when I'm looking at a new product that we're putting together, I sort of slice things by those 3 points, which is how does it help you save time, faster, better, whatever, and money, save money, have more money, more efficiency, better use of resources, and then sort of the attractive factor, which how does this make you look better to yourself, your customers, your boss, the press, analysts. All that perception is kind of its own monster. And then I'm kind of a pessimist, so I have a fourth surprise. This is like one of those. This was back when I was nuts about PowerPoint Venn diagrams, and they had circles. And then over in the lower, right, I would put this gray circle that said salvation.
Salvation.
I'm a playwright, so I think most characters act from selfish, motivations. That it's all internal about what you want, what you're going for, the world you want to see. But some people are honestly motivated by, salvation, redemption, grace, nirvana. So that's kind of that's I guess that's my Midwest nice side showing a little bit. That's not always just sort of like time and money and sex, but there's part of a salvation element as well. So that's kind of when I'm dividing up how to talk about a product in my head, that's how I think about it. And then at the kind of meta level, if I talk about it at the top level, every product is about control.
Control as in?
That your life is out of control. Your platform, your search apps, your phone, your marriage, whatever it is. That you have this world that is out of control, this part of your life that's out of control. And this product or service is going to give you that. You look at CPG marketing for Procter & Gamble, all those products, Brawny paper towels, it's like, life is out of control. And every household product that's marketed to moms especially is about how do you get that control back.
Yeah, busy moms. Chaos.
Lifestyle choices. And this is how do you get that control, whether it's part of it or a large part of it. So that's the other question I ask our engineers and product guys is, how does this, it's the pain point, it's the pain point argument, but more than just what's the pain point is how does this help people wrangle things and feel they have a sense of control?
Okay, so based on those 4 pillars, you essentially think you could take any product and give it to any audience.
I think those are the 3 avenues or 4 that I start with when I'm trying to analyze how to talk about something.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned
all of them all the time, but especially in software that I work, technology that I work in, it's time and money is always the thing. It's always time and money, and then how does it make things better and make things better for people's lives or for your employees, your customers, and you appear better because of these new things.
One thing that you mentioned that kind of struck me, we talk about this a little bit in our sales and marketing meetings internally, is yes, the organization is your customer, the greater organization that's buying your platform or buying your product. But at the end of the day, it's Mary from purchasing, and she's got 5 years to retirement and kids in college. Her ass is on the line making this buying decision. She's the one that gets hauled in front of the board and fired or whatnot if it goes wrong. So while we talk about the time and the money and the sex appeal and all these things in terms of the whole organization, we try to never forget Mary. It's just about Mary right now.
Yeah, there is somebody that just wants to get a blog post up. Or
exactly.
They forgot how the categories work. Or the plugin's not working because they upgraded automatically and they don't know what to do. It's again with storytelling, the more specific a story is, often the more universal it looks. Because we all know how it is when things go wrong or blow up at work, you're you're on the line, you don't know how to fix it. So decisions are made by individuals. You have your committee, decision making, of course, but at the end of the day, somebody says, we're going to sign off this, we're going to do it, and if it blows up, it's literally me. Like, it's on me to figure out.
Yeah, there's a lot riding on it.
Yeah, so it could be the admin that is the person that has to learn how to use the friggin' thing, or it could be the stakeholders or the C-level executive trying to explain why we bought this $1 billion platform.
Yeah. Hey, so let's talk about blogging. You said that you were one of the first authors to get a book deal based on your blogging. So take us back. What sort of content were you writing about? What was the format, the medium? And then how did you get the exposure that then got a publisher calling? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when you're writing copy or putting a message out there, it's not about you as the brand, as the product. It's about how our customers talking to each other about what they're doing with your product. So it's that warmth, that passionate human voice that really drew people in with social media in the first place. That's why you had these news blogs, because that were kind of turning the world of journalism upside down, where it wasn't, I'm not going to wait until I know everything for sure. I'm going to publish what I know now.
Hot takes.
I go along and do a hot take. Right now, like, everything is a hot take. Like, we have destroyed the culture with hot take culture, basically. It's all recapped as hot takes. Anyway, so that is, I started teaching blogging to entrepreneurs, and I had a newsletter, and I was doing sort of classes like this where I was doing distance learning, teaching people how to use TypePad and Blogger and how to use email newsletters and podcasting and all that stuff back then. This was all pre-Facebook. And then I got like Blog of the Year by Marketing Sherpa, I think.
Oh, nice.
Because they had like a fan favorite category, and I had sent my newsletter to go vote for me, and I think that's what happened. And I think that's what got me the attention from some editors at Portfolio, which is out of Penguin. Is, one of them said, "Hey, I like your writing. I can see from your blog, you know what the hell you're doing. You know what the hell you're saying. Would you want to write a book to be in bookstores?" And I'm like, "This never happens." So that came out back in 2006, and I had to choose a blog platform to put forward, and WordPress was not as mature back then as it is now.
Yeah.
And I've been teaching people on TypePad, which for people that don't know what the TypePad is, it is one of the older blog platforms. From a company called Six Apart, which they sold TypePad to another company. I can't remember right this second, but so I had been teaching people how to use software, and I had featured them in my book. And so I reached out to somebody that works there and said, "Hey, I've been like teaching the world how to use your software." And they said, "Oh, well, we have this marketing manager position open, and we need somebody to do customer training." And so that's that gets us to 2008, which is how I got to San Francisco for my first job in San Francisco. Was being
Nice.
a trainer for this blogging company.
So, if you don't mind me asking, how did the book sell?
I think about 30. Let's see. I just barely made the advance back.
Ah, right.
Um, we did an Amazon campaign. I got pretty far up there on a couple of days of getting people to buy the book. And it did pretty well. But I think my editor changed midway, so I think that also changed my sort of the focus they had on the book as well.
Ah, I gotcha.
But
So,
it was something, that I can always say that I did. And a few people write their own books. I literally wrote the whole thing myself. And it was a great experience, and it got me sort of to this job and level that I have now.
so, and like you said, it got you to San Francisco. So you've been there for, you said about 10 years, 8, 9 years. What's
8 years, yeah. Oh, wait, 11 years, sorry.
11 years? What's life in this city like now? If you watch social media, there's a lot of flight. People are, the tech scene is leaving San Francisco to some degree, but, it's not ever going to go away. What's it like for you to live there with your husband?
We're literally, like, I can show you right now, like, that's literally Twitter right there.
Oh, wow.
So we live, like, right next door to so we're literally downtown right now. It's a very strange city. It's kind of the tragedy of progressivism when people sort of get too left-sided about things. The city just declared the NRA to be a terrorist organization, or they just found new terms they're going to use for felons or people in prison. Meanwhile, the streets are covered in shit, and the homeless problem is completely out of control. And
Wow.
There have been conferences that have moved out of San Francisco because the attendees are horrified by sort of the homeless problem here. But it's an amazing city to live in. It is vibrant at all times. It's my husband and I, so it's great that, where you don't feel out of place, don't feel threatened. People might throw something at us every once in a while, but that's relatively infrequent for San Francisco.
Yeah.
But it's a strange city because of the huge wealth inequality, where you have, I'm sitting in a 8th floor of a 40-story luxury apartment building. And then there's there's tent cities under the overpass at night. So it's a very strange combination of economics and, like I said, it's kind of like if you take the techno-libertarianism that invented the internet and all this technology and push it to its limit and add in all this progressivism, that's kind of what happens.
It's too much of a good thing. It's got a great ideal set on paper, and if executed in moderation all around, it might be utopia. But when a few things are getting out of whack, then it's kind of taken too far, is what you're saying.
Or I always point people to, there's a map of San Francisco with the height requirements for building. And, you look at the yellow, which is, the limit is 4 stories. And most of the city has a limit of 4 stories for building. So if you're going to build an apartment building, you have to build very expensive condos or apartments because you only build 4 to 5 floors. And then you can't really devote a whole lot of units for the below market rate housing for the poor and people that need that. And it really comes down to people here are enjoying their property values and they want their view of the bay. And that's like, once you sort of realize, you're like, oh, this makes more sense. Once I realize people are, they'll throw up a 2-year delay for an environmental study over taking a mural down or converting a laundromat into, a condo building. It's really, it's very, once you kind of realize that it's about preserving people's property values as well as sort of their view of the bay or their view of the skyline, it makes a lot more sense. But also at the same time, there are neighborhoods where the commercial rents are so out of control that restaurants are closing left and right. Like you're the Castro neighborhood right now. There's restaurants that close, every couple of months because restaurateurs, proprietors, business owners cannot make enough money to pay the rents, and the landlords are raising the rents sort of out, higher than they should be given the merchants. Even just here in this corner of 10th and Market in San Francisco, down by Twitter, there's restaurants that have come and gone, really, high-scale restaurants. And I think people underestimate how much these tech folks want to leave the house. If I come back from the gym at night, there's all these Postmates people coming in and Grubhub people coming in, and people just have that. It's almost a fortress mentality sometimes.
Yeah, perfect.
But it's a great city. It's a crazy city. You know, I'm from Indiana, so it's nice to kind of go from conservative side of things to much. I mean, I was raised pretty liberal, but to go to sort of really outrageous libertinism. You know, we have in a couple of weeks we have what we call the Folsom Street Fair, which is a very wild weekend of libertine behavior. So we'll see how, and the whole city celebrates it. It's really interesting. It's very, European, I would say.
You know, what you said about where it's a capitalist thing about real estate valuations.
Yeah.
I was reading the other day, Japan, Denmark, a few other countries have negative interest rates on home loans right now because it's obviously subsidized, and the federal governments of those countries want to encourage home ownership and want to limit the wealth disparity, make sure everybody has a place to live. And there's trade-offs with each economic model. But my wife's Danish, and we're looking at like, wow, the government will pay you 0.5% to go buy a house in Denmark.
And I think there's an element, like if you look at, because this is happening all over the world, where people are being priced out of, neighborhoods, and it's the financialization of real estate, where in New York you have empty buildings in Manhattan and nobody can afford to run a bodega on the corner store because they've been putting money as investments into these buildings and not as places for people to live. So I think the financialization globally of real estate is a pretty big trend that's making it a dire need for everybody. I don't think there's any place in the country that a minimum wage job can pay the average rent.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, how did this happen? Who is the money going to? Who did it go to before? What's actually changed? I think a lot of it is treating real estate as investments versus as a place where I live. Changes that priority.
So you mentioned, you had your Midwest upbringing, and you're fairly liberal in the Midwest. I don't know, does that make you conservative in California, or?
I mean, my parents were public school teachers, and so teachers are usually pretty progressive-minded, and they were hand weavers, so we grew up. They helped preserve Appalachian folk weaving styles. So in the summer, we would do crafts fairs all over Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee with hand woven rugs and garments and mats and shirts and scarves, and that was our summer job, was weaving. So we had a sweatshop growing up. So they were very sort of hippie, but without the drugs, is what I usually say.
Gotcha.
Very sort of open-minded, and it was more a sense of there's all kinds of people, but here's what we do.
Yeah.
Sort of liberal in thought, conservative in action. And then I lived in Chicago for 10 years, and that was sort of a nice in-between of the sort of the big city point of view. I still miss living in Chicago. We just talked about moving back. And sort of the big city of Chicago, the sort of big city feel, and sort of still have the practical mindset of Chicago, of the Midwest. Yeah. And I always tell people when I did my first day at my first job in San Francisco, I showed up at like 8 and nobody was there. The office manager had not even opened the building yet. And, there's a certain laxness in San Francisco where people just don't show up for meetings on time. You just sort of have to recognize there's that looseness that people have here. I don't know if everybody's stoned all the time or they get other things to do, but there's just this sort of, it's much more relaxed compared to like East Coast where it's go, 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 go.
Yeah.
It's much more laid back. Not like Hawaii laid back, but in between.
You said a word, practicality. I think sometimes the tech scene could use a dose of practicality. Like, are scooters on every corner really practical? I
mean, I saw 2 guys on the street who were probably out of their minds, ripping apart 2 scooters by the train stop and screaming yesterday.
Oh.
And the whole scooter thing was an interesting attitude because it was that kind of that tech bro point of view of, fuck the commons. I'm going to litter the streets with these scooters on a public thoroughfare and screw what anybody else thinks. I'm going to treat all these sidewalks as my private parking lot.
Yeah.
Because it's that old the tech bro thing of nobody's going to stop me if I'm just going to do it myself, which is a very privileged point of view. And the city, and for a while, for a couple of months, we had just scooters littering the streets, and they'd pick them up and recharge them and put them back, and it was just. And then finally, they got some permits that sort of shut it down and made it a lot more sensible.
Yeah.
But it was a perfect example of the attitude of I don't care if I blow up the municipal taxi system like Uber and Lyft are doing. I don't care if this disruption removes people's jobs or livelihood or condemns them to poverty or uproots their entire family. That it's the belief that my progress, my advancement is over everybody else's. I mean, the joke I make lately is if we have all this AI and ML, why don't we have these machines decide how can we have an economy that replicates the post World War II prosperity that we all sort of harken back to?
Yeah.
For everybody, how can we have an economy that gives us our Norman Rockwell, but with diversity point of view, with everybody having jobs and healthcare and families and prosperity, and so nobody's dying in the middle of the street at night. That is what AI should be working on, not how to deliver my fucking fried chicken to me, from tenderloin to here with a little robot that's going to get ripped off anyway.
Can we put these supercomputers and algorithms to use on the basics, like people not dying in the street? Can we just start there?
Problem. Those are not glamorous problems. The other joke I've heard is so many of these companies and apps and startups are really just replicating things that your mom did for you. You had the one where they come pick up your laundry, do your dry cleaning, maid service by the hour, or it's like there's a reason why we all don't have butlers. It's really expensive, and maybe the margin isn't enough to justify building an app to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That is so. Does converting something into an app and anonymizing sort of the hiring process and the provisioning of finding people to do things, does that savings actually is that enough to build a business?
Well, and
efficient markets where there's people that want to do things and people that want to need things, and you match them up. It's rent seeking. How can you shave a little bit off the top for yourself when you're not really adding a whole lot?
Yeah, some of the spectacular flame outs are testament that maybe there's not enough margin up there on top.
The Uber numbers. If I could spend $1 billion in marketing a quarter, I could sell the shit out of things. It just blows my mind, just like vaporizing billions of dollars a quarter, and we're all okay with that. And the market and the stock price is doing pretty well. But I will confess, I live literally on the same block as Uber. Like I can turn to the left and it's right there, along with Square. So I kind of hope that I don't want them to do well, because then all those people want to live here in this building and jack up the rent even more. And I know the lockout is coming soon where they can all cash in their stocks. So I'm like, oh God, it's going to, it might throw our rent that we have to either leave the city or move somewhere different.
Wow. So it's got a very personal, you have a very personal stake on kind of the future IPOs and cash outs.
Yeah, I do. And, and that's another sort of dynamic of San Francisco I would mention is you always feel squeezed. I think no matter how much you make or where you live, you always feel this constant kind of enclosing circle as things get more expensive, as things get harder to afford, whether you have a car or not, or a parking space or not, or kids or not. It's just like it just keeps getting more and more difficult to live here. And you have to weigh the benefits of it. It's like you could just visit often and not live here if you want. And is it worth it to keep putting up with those dynamics where people looking at it from the outside from other cities are like, you are out of your mind. Why would you pay that much to live in a 1-bedroom apartment? That's actually insane, So it's a give and take, and it's that sense of like everything is constantly closing in around you. You're gonna have to figure out how to make it work or do better.
Where would be home if it wasn't San Francisco? Where would you and your husband end up?
I mean, we talk about Chicago a lot because his family's in Milwaukee, mine's in Indiana, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
fly back and forth. And we lived there for 10 years, and yeah, it's cold as hell, but like millions of people and civilizations managed to make it work every winter and survive. And we could probably travel more if we lived there. And he's a flight attendant, so he'd be flying out of SFO, which would be a lot, which he could transfer relatively easily. I really don't know right now, but we talk about San Diego as well, because San Diego is kind of like gay enough, where it's still out here. It's not totally, whitey town. It's not totally straight town. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But
And the Rust Belt is kind of making, I think, a renaissance, or at least it's poised for renaissance.
I think all these sort of first tier cities are maxing out, that people just don't want to pay the salaries for people to work here anymore. So they're turning to Minneapolis, and there's tech startup stuff happening in Louisville, by where I grew up, and in Nashville, where they're looking at other cities and other regions where there's developers in the Midwest that would like to live next to their families but still work on software.
Yeah.
And probably have much cheaper salaries. And that's kind of the all these tech people say that we have decentralized teams and remote workers and how great that is, but then they pay all these development teams really high salaries to stay in San Francisco or stay in the Bay Area, or Seattle or Portland or Austin, wherever, New York.
So your criteria is a relaxing, comfortable city that is friendly and welcoming.
Right. Sort of, gay enough that we're not going to get shit thrown at ourselves for old things. That's kind of the metric is we will not get attacked for being married. It's kind of the, I guess if that's the baseline for deciding where you live, that's kind of terrible, but that's the reality of where we are in this country right now.
What you said about where we are in this country right now, you were referencing the time shortly after 9/11 and contrasting it with today. I don't know which is worse.
Well, it's, I think that the rehabilitation of George W. Bush's reputation while Trump has the spotlight is kind of shocking. It's like all those people literally lied to get us into 2 wars and broke Geneva Conventions by torturing people, and they knew all of that. And, and then George gives Michelle Obama a piece of candy at a funeral, and everybody's like, oh, he's such a nice elderly statesman. He paints now. It's like, no, he's still what he was and what the mistakes he made. And I think that people, we don't talk about where the troops are, where the soldiers are, where our military operations are, because Americans just don't like to think about that. We don't think about ourselves as having tendrils all over the world with our military actions. So I think that's part of, for George W. Bush, is that rehabilitation, that he's this elderly statesman, when it's like, no, that was some pretty terrible times in terms of how we shredded civil rights, how we went to war, how we embraced xenophobia and panic, instead of appealing to our better, higher selves. That's always that. Well, I remember that there was an essay where it was, after 9/11, a few days later, George W. Bush got on the TV, and instead of really pulling people together, it was like, well, people need to go to the malls and start shopping now. You have to get the economy back going. It wasn't, let's embrace things. Let's all go shopping. And then we have to get the stock market open, but there's literally an open cemetery in downtown New York, but we have to get the stock market running again. So it was kind of a little schizophrenic. With Trump, and I think that with Trump, and I'm going to be very political for a little bit, if that's okay, is I think that we have sort of the end game of the Republican Southern strategy, where the Republicans made a very specific move in the 60s to appeal to white resentment in the South, to white Democrats who kind of resented civil rights progress, and use that to bring them to the Republican side of things. It used to be farmers were always Democrats, they were always liberals, because that was who helped them, and then the Southern strategy was a way to sort of key off that resentment and bring people into the Republican side of things. And Trump is the end game of that. And I think you can't look at any issue today in politics without putting it through a lens of white supremacy and the sort of the race history of the country. Because if you dig around, pretty much everything that's bad about where we are right now. Like, if you look at tipping, we have tipping because of racist wage policies. If you look at the war on drugs, Nixon put it together to put black people in jail and get rid of war dissenters. It's always kind of like it's either racism or sexism. Usually, it's like one of those, one way or another. But I think Trump is the end game of this. He really is aligning himself with the white supremacist movement in the United States, and I don't know where it goes next. Because a lot of people feel like there was just a study that they interviewed a lot of Trump supporters, about 6,000 of them, and a quarter of them said that they really just feel like things need to burn down to the ground for us to start over again. So it's that nihilism that's really concerning. But you find that on the left side too, where people are like, let's just write it into hell and incinerate everything, and then we will somehow build a new civilization. So who knows? But I think Trump is not an aberration. I think he's the eventual manifestation of strategy for several decades. And I think that as speaking as the person that's on the left side of things for the most part, every part, you sort of have to tie Trump to the Republican Party and throw him off the dock.
Yeah.
Biden has this fantasy that once once somebody different is in power, the Republicans will act different. No. And I don't think they will, because they've been able to throw everybody else under the bus, individuals, groups, to retain power. And I don't think they're going to give that up very easily.
I don't think so either. When Trump first got elected, I was telling my wife something like, okay, this is a shit show. But in 4 years, when it runs its course, we have to not just beat him. We have to obliterate that side. You can't leave a shred of it. Even the tip of a blade of grass. It has to just all be burned down, or else it's just going to manifest and keep coming.
Well, and I think a lot of people were very optimistic, thinking, okay, well, we've got over the race thing over the past 2 decades. But it's like, no, we're going to have to excavate this all over again. Look at it. Get a generation to sort of reconsider it, get a new generation that educated on it. And will that make any difference? It's a very, it's the whole, people, the preppers have their fantasy of sort of this race war happening. It's like, well, what does that look like to these people, where they feel like they're armed to the teeth, they have to have a bunker, and the people they don't like are going to come get them, But again, I'm sitting here in a apartment building, so they would probably come to get me as well, and I'd be like, no, wait, I'm a liberal, I'm gay, it's okay. Who knows?
Wow. So, Andy, we covered a lot of ground today. This is going to be one. This is one for the ages. I love it.
Good.
All right. So, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. We talked about the hero's journey, your books, the publishing, San Francisco, politics. Get out and vote this November, everybody. Yeah. So please tell everybody where they can find you online, Andy.
All right, I have a blog that is in desperate need of updating, so don't make fun of me. It's andywibbels.com. And then I have a personal blog that is probably too rowdy for a business context, but that is at andymatic.com. That's my old personal blog, which is probably a little obnoxious right now. So if you are conservative or prone to clutch your pearls, have them ready to go as you do it. Or on Instagram at andymaticgram. And then I've got a Medium, but that's just my wedding essay. What else? That's really it. And Facebook, you can find me on Facebook easily.
Yeah. All right. So go out there and see the words that Andy have put to paper, or digital paper.
Twitter, Andy Matic is my Twitter handle too. So.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.